Her words sliced through the thick layers of doubt that had wrapped around my heart for so long. That night, I stayed up editing my resume, writing cover letters, practicing interviews, and reading everything I could about Maxwell. I didn't sleep, but I didn't feel tired. For the first time in a long, long while, I felt alive. On interview day, I walked into Maxwell's office. Floors gleaming with white marble, windows stretching up to the sky, reflecting the sharply dressed professionals striding confidently inside. Me, in a hastily rented gray suit, a misfit among the polished crowd. But I held my head high. I wasn't here to beg, I was here to prove. The interview lasted almost 2 hours. They fired every tough question imaginable. Investment strategies, risk management, macroeconomic analysis. Every time I answered, I repeated to myself, I've come this far. There's no turning back. 1 week later, while folding laundry in my cramped apartment, my phone rang. "Olivia Evans," a deep male voice asked. "Yes. We are pleased to offer you a position as an investment analyst at Maxwell Investment Group. Congratulations." I collapsed onto my bed, unable to hold back the tears. But these were tears of triumph. The early days at Maxwell were pure hell. Crippling pressure, endless late hours, thick stacks of reports, demanding clients. Many times, I thought I would break. But every time I wanted to quit, I thought about the cabin my grandparents sold for me. I thought about the cold eyes of my mother in Madison that night. And I hurled myself into the work like a moth into flame. While my colleagues left for home at 5 p.m., I stayed until 10 p.m. When they gathered at bars on weekends, I sat alone in my room, analyzing markets, studying new investment strategies. When I was assigned a small portfolio for a startup tech company, I seized the opportunity like a starving person grabbing bread. 3 months later, the portfolio's value increased by 35%. A number that made the entire Maxwell office take notice. "Olivia, the way you turned that messy portfolio around is truly impressive," my department head said, his eyes full of genuine recognition. "I think you have what it takes to go far." The first promotion came after a year, along with a bonus I had only ever dreamed about. I spent that first bonus buying a car, not a flashy sports car, but a luxurious SUV, strong enough to take my grandparents on weekend drives whenever they wanted. The day I drove the new car home, they stood in the front yard. Their faces a mix of bewilderment and pride. Grandpa chuckled hoarsely. "Our granddaughter's driving a fancy car now, huh?" I just smiled and hugged them tightly. No words were needed. They knew, and so did I. 2 years after stepping into Maxwell, I signed a contract to purchase a penthouse apartment on the 28th floor of a newly opened building downtown. The apartment measured 1,800 square feet, with floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooking the glittering Hudson River. On the day I signed the contract, I stood in the empty space, my hand trembling as it touched the cold glass. "I did this on my own," I whispered. "No handouts. No loans. No one could take this victory away from me." I hung a picture of my grandparents and me on the very first wall, a permanent reminder that I was never truly alone. Then, on a gloomy autumn morning, as I stepped out of the elevator, I ran into a familiar face right outside the building. Madison. She stood there in Lululemon gym clothes, holding a smoothie, her mouth dropping open when she saw me. "Olivia!" she gasped as if seeing a ghost. I smiled, slowly lifting my cup of hot coffee, and replied casually, "Hey Madison, I live here." I pointed upward, to the top floor where my penthouse was located. In that moment, for the first time in my life, I saw raw envy flash across my sister's eyes. I thought that after running into Madison outside the building, the chapter between me and my family would finally close. But I was wrong. And as always, they managed to make things worse. One late evening at the end of March, while reading financial news under the warm golden lights of my living room, my phone rang. Seeing Mom flash on the screen, I froze for a few seconds. All these years, she had never reached out first. Part of me wanted to hit ignore, but curiosity won. I picked up. "Olivia, hi, sweetheart." My mother's voice was syrupy sweet, so fake it made my skin crawl. "Hi, Mom," I replied coolly. "Wow, hearing your voice makes me so happy. Your father and I were just around your area, wondering if we could stop by for a little visit." "Around, stop by?" I squinted at the screen. Something smelled fishy. But, fine, I wanted to hear what they were scheming. "Sure," I answered flatly. "Come over." 15 minutes later, the doorbell rang. I opened the door, and there stood my parents, oddly polished and neatly dressed. Mom's eyes swept quickly across my living room, lingering on the Italian leather sofa and the glass walls with sweeping city views. "You're living really well," she said, unable to hide her mix of surprise and jealousy. I smirked. "Come in." They sat down stiffly, like people about to negotiate a high-stakes deal. I sat across from them, arms crossed, waiting. "Olivia?" My father cleared his throat. "The thing is, Madison is getting married to Nathan." I nodded. "I know." Mom immediately chimed in, voice dripping honey. "We promised Nathan's family that we'd cover half of the wedding costs. But the expenses have gone higher than we expected." I blinked slowly. I could already guess the next words. "The total cost is about $300,000, Mom continued, her face slightly flushed. "We need about $150,000 to cover our share." The room fell into dead silence, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. Finally, I tilted my head, staring straight at them. "So you're here to ask me for money?" "Not ask," Dad waved his hands frantically. Just a loan. We'll do up proper papers. We'll pay back everything." I almost laughed out loud. "A loan?" I sneered. "Like the loan I begged you for when I wanted to go to college? When I offered to sign an official contract with interest?" Mom's face immediately darkened. "Olivia, don't dig up the past," she snapped. I leaned forward, my voice as cold as steel. "The past is the only thing that shows us who was truly family, and who just used me as a tool." Dad fidgeted with his tie awkwardly. Mom sighed heavily, switching to a pleading tone. "You're doing so well now, you could easily help. Are you really going to let Madison be humiliated in front of Nathan's family?" I leaned back, arms folded across my chest. "When I needed help to go to college," I said slowly, each word cutting like a knife, "you told me I wasn't worth investing in." I smirked, voice icy. "So now, sorry, I don't see why I should invest in a lavish wedding I'm not even invited to." Mom's face turned crimson as she shot up from her seat. "Olivia Evans, you ungrateful brat." I stood up calmly, walking straight to the door, yanking open the heavy glass panel. "Please leave my apartment," I said coldly. My father stood up, awkwardly pulling my mother along. "You'll regret this," my mother screamed before disappearing behind the slamming door. I stood there in silence, listening to their footsteps fade down the hallway. No more tears. No more pain. Only a cold, brilliant peace, like sunlight piercing through ice. That night, I stood by the glass window, staring at the distant lights across the river. A chapter had closed. And I finally had full control to write the rest of my story without those who had belittled, drained, or used me. I took a sip of red wine and smiled. Madison would have her wedding. My family would go on pretending I never existed. And me? I would keep moving forward, proud, without ever looking back. I thought after throwing my parents out of my apartment it would be the end. I was wrong. They didn't just knock on my door. They knocked on the whole town's. Just a few weeks later, the rumor started spreading like wildfire in a dry season. From the corner grocery store to the church where my grandparents still attended, whispers floated everywhere, so absurd I had to laugh at their shamelessness. Olivia Evans? She got rich and forgot her family. Fifth girl lives in a fancy penthouse now and treats her parents like trash. Did you hear? She even kicked her own mother out of her house. I heard it all. While standing in line at the supermarket, walking through the park, even attending church services. Their eyes followed me, cold, judgmental, as if I were a wayward, ungrateful child. I knew exactly who was behind it all. None other than my mother and Madison. In their eyes, if they couldn't control me, they would destroy my reputation. One Friday evening while having dinner with my grandparents in the warm little kitchen, Grandpa set down his fork and looked at me, heavily. "Olivia, we know everything," he said. I looked up, the bread in my mouth suddenly tasting like dust. "Your parents," Grandma hesitated, then sighed. "They've been telling everyone you turned your back on your family for money." I gripped my fork tighter, but my voice stayed calm. "I know." Grandpa placed his hand over mine and squeezed. "You don't have to explain yourself to anyone. The people who truly know you, they'll understand." I smiled, a sad but genuine smile. "I don't intend to explain anything, Grandpa," I whispered. "I no longer have time for those who aren't worth it." From that day on, I chose silence. I didn't argue. I didn't confront. I didn't defend myself. I let the rumors swirl around me like toxic wind, blowing past, fading on their own. Because I understood, answering them would only fuel the fire. Instead, I poured my energy into work, into growing investment portfolios, into peaceful dinners with my grandparents, into the freedom I had earned through years of painful sacrifice. One Saturday afternoon, while sitting in my favorite cafe reading market reports, Lisa, my old college friend, texted me, "Have you heard? Madison and her family are bad-mouthing you everywhere. But don't worry, a lot of people aren't buying it." I smirked, typing back, "Thanks, I'm fine." A week later, I received an email from the company. I was nominated for the position of senior investment manager. A step I had never dared to dream would come so soon. I threw myself into work even more fiercely, proving myself through results, through growing profits, through handshakes and nods of respect at board meetings. With each new stone I laid for my future, the rumors around me grew smaller, more irrelevant. One evening, sitting with my grandparents under the porch roof, gazing at a sky ablaze with stars, Grandma gently said, "You know, Olivia, people can only talk behind your back when they can't reach you." I nodded, biting my lip to stop tears from falling. Grandpa added, his voice deep and warm, "You chose the hardest road. Not hating, not retaliating. And that's the greatest victory of all." The breeze blew softly across the porch, carrying the scent of fresh grass and the sweet pride that hung quietly between us. I leaned my head against Grandma's shoulder, closing my eyes, letting myself be wrapped in pure peace. The town still buzzed with gossip, but I no longer really heard it. I was busy preparing strategic presentations for the board of directors. I spent weekends taking my grandparents to parks, visiting small fairs, savoring quiet dinners, without caring about anyone's stares. Every time I closed a big investment deal, I secretly rewarded myself. Not with luxury goods, but with simple joys. A good book, a long hike, a silent dinner filled with true happiness. My parents and Madison continued playing their games, trying to drag me back into the old swamp. But this time, I was no longer little Olivia. I was the author of my own story. And in that story, they were just minor characters. Faded, outdated, powerless. News of Madison's wedding spread quickly through town, like every other event our family had once tried so hard to inflate. But this time, what spread even faster were the whispered criticisms they couldn't control. I wasn't invited. And even if I had been, I never would have shown up. That day, while the entire town flocked to the big church to attend the event of the century my family had bragged about for months, I sat quietly in my penthouse apartment, sipping a hot cup of coffee, the window open to welcome the cool morning breeze. Sarah, the only close friend I had left from college, texted me during the ceremony. "You won't believe it. Everything's falling apart." I set my cup down, a strange sense of anticipation rising inside me. A few minutes later, my phone rang. Sarah's voice buzzed with excitement. Turns out Nathan's family found out your parents couldn't cover their promised share. Nathan's mother nearly called off the wedding on the spot. I leaned back in my chair, smirking. According to Sarah, Nathan and his family had been bombarded by calls from the caterers, florists, and event planners, because my parents had failed to pay their part. In the end, to save face, the groom's side had to cough up the full amount, but the resentment couldn't be hidden. In all the wedding photos later posted on social media, Madison smiled, but it was stiff and painfully fake. My parents, dressed in brand new outfits, stood awkwardly at the edges of the frames, like forgotten decorations. Those photos quickly spread, accompanied by the very whispers they once hurled at me. This family looks rich, but it's all just empty show. Once again, the masks they wore for years were ripped away, under the cold scrutiny of the very society they once longed to impress. I didn't attend the wedding. I didn't send a gift. Not even a congratulatory message. Instead, I spent that day with my grandparents, sipping herbal tea in the backyard, and listening to Grandpa retell stories of long-ago summers. No one mentioned Madison. No one mentioned the lavish yet hollow wedding taking place just a few miles away. We chose peace. And for me, that was the greatest gift. A few weeks later, I heard rumors that Madison and Nathan had moved into a small suburban house, purchased by Nathan's family. My parents were no longer welcome at the family gatherings they had once desperately hoped to be part of. My mother, who once bragged about becoming a distinguished mother-in-law, now received only cold glances and subtle indifference. Sarah updated me occasionally, but I didn't care much. I was busy living the life I had fought so hard to build. My career at Maxwell continued to thrive. The portfolios I managed kept outperforming expectations, bringing me closer to an executive-level position. Every weekend, I drove back to my grandparents' little house, bringing small gifts, a bouquet of fresh flowers, dishes I learned from the city, or simply stories that made the three of us laugh until our sides hurt. No luxury needed. No applause required. Just a place, arms open wide, where I truly belonged. One October evening, standing on my penthouse balcony, gazing at the city lights sprawling below, I whispered to myself, I don't need revenge. I just need to live well. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't retaliation or making others suffer. It's proving they have no power over you anymore. They can say what they want. They can weave hundreds of slanderous stories. But if they can't take away the peace in my heart, they can't touch what I've built with my own hands. Never again. That night, before going to sleep, I texted Sarah. Thank you for always being there. I'm really okay. I'm free. My phone buzzed almost immediately. I'm so proud of you, Olivia. You deserve every bit of happiness you've carved out. I smiled and turned off the lights. A soft smile, free of bitterness, free of resentment. Only peace. Peace. The precious gift I fought my whole scarred childhood to achieve. And I swore I would never lose it again. Olivia's story reminds us that not everyone born into our family is truly family. Sometimes, betrayal and belittlement come from those who should have loved us unconditionally. But beyond the pain, Olivia proved that self-worth doesn't come from others' approval. It comes from perseverance and belief in yourself. Cutting off toxic relationships isn't a failure, it's the beginning of a life of freedom, peace, and true worth. What do you think about Olivia's journey? Would you have the strength to walk away from unworthy relationships like she did? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful family stories. Everyone thought my family was perfect. A 2-story house in the suburbs of New Hampshire, my dad's cozy little cafe, and family photos of beaming smiles covering the walls. But if anyone ever asked me about my childhood, I could only smile and stay silent, because the truth was nothing like those pretty pictures. The favoritism in my family wasn't subtle, it was paraded around like a trophy. And I, Olivia Evans, was just the faint shadow behind my sister Madison's blinding light. Madison was exactly 2 years older than me, but from the beginning, the gap between us was more than just numbers. If Madison was the sun, I was forever the forgotten shadow. I still remember vividly the night I was 8 years old. Madison had just returned from a school piano recital, and the whole house erupted with pride. Mom brought out a cake, Dad popped open non-alcoholic champagne, and relatives called non-stop to congratulate her. I stood silently in the corner, still clutching the second-place art contest painting I had won at school. No one asked. No one looked. My certificate flipped face down on the table from a stray breeze. Just like my presence in this house, unnoticed. Every birthday of Madison's was a grand event. Mom would hire a party planner with balloons and a giant cake. And me? If I was lucky, I got a rushed supermarket cake with the word "Congratulations" scrawled messily on it. I still remember my 10th birthday. I even had to share the party with Madison, for convenience. Mom said it like it was a privilege, but deep down I knew I was never meant to have anything just for myself. Madison always had the best. When she turned 14, my parents bought her the latest iPhone. I inherited her old cracked one. Madison wore Abercrombie and Fitch. I stumbled through life in patched-up hand-me-downs. "Don't complain, Olivia," Mom would say coldly. "You should be grateful for what you have." At every family gathering, the moment Madison spoke, all eyes would turn to her. Academic awards, trophies, club leaderships. Madison's achievements were retold like legends. I sat by the food tray, quietly chewing stale bread, wondering if anyone even remembered the name of the tiny environmental club I'd joined. It wasn't that I did poorly. I maintained a steady B average, participated in activities, and even won 3rd place in a district debate contest. But in my parents' eyes, everything I did was just average. Okay. Try harder. Olivia. That phrase, "try harder," followed me through every year of my childhood like a dull, aching wound that never healed. One evening, while I was folding laundry for Mom, she casually dropped a comment like a knife to the heart. "Olivia, you should consider something practical. Retail work or waitressing is honorable too." I forced a smile, finishing folding my worn-out blouse, but inside me, something cracked. No one asked what I wanted. No one thought I had dreams. To them, I should just be grateful to exist beside Madison, the family's precious gem. Even now, I remember those nights when Madison was away at piano lessons and I was left scrubbing the cafe floors. Every time a customer complimented how clean the place looked, Mom would smile proudly, never once mentioning the child who had knelt to polish every single tile and glass pane. My efforts were invisible, just like me. One time, I mustered the courage to ask Mom to enroll me in a night art class, the only thing I truly loved. She looked at me, as if I had said something absurd. "The money's already saved for Madison's summer camp," she said curtly, turning away as if the conversation had never happened. I learned to accept. I learned to stay silent. I learned to tell myself that if I couldn't be a star, at least, I shouldn't be a burden. But every time I saw Madison confidently stepping out into the world, I couldn't help but wonder. Was it my fault? Was I truly as insignificant as they made me feel? The shadow they built around me grew heavier by the year. But what they didn't realize was that the loneliness, the silence, the constant belittling, were quietly forging a strength they never anticipated. One day, I swore to myself I would step out of that shadow, not for them to see me, but for me to finally see myself. And this is where my story begins. That moment burned into my memory, the night Madison received her acceptance letter from Brown University. Our little house exploded in laughter and cheers. Mom danced around the living room, hugging Madison so tightly she squeaked, while Dad popped open the most expensive bottle of wine I'd ever seen at home. "A daughter! An Ivy League student!" Mom choked out, clutching the acceptance letter like it was a golden ticket to paradise. I stood pressed against the staircase railing, clutching my final report card. GPA 3.6, not bad for a kid who had to juggle school and part-time cafe work. But no one asked about my grades. No one looked back. All night, Madison's laughter filled every corner of the house, drowning out everything else. I whispered a quiet congratulations to myself before retreating to my room. I had gotten used to being the background character during their celebrations, or so I thought. 1 week later, Mom and Dad announced they were throwing a party to celebrate Madison. They booked the fanciest Italian restaurant in town, ordered a 3-tier cake, and invited nearly everyone they knew, including people I didn't even recognize. "You deserve a grand beginning," Mom beamed, double-checking the guest list. I smiled faintly. Inside, I told myself, my time will come. 2 years later, it was finally my turn to chase my college dream. I had done everything I could. Studied hard. Joined volunteer clubs, taken part-time internships, poured my heart into my personal essay. When I received my acceptance letter from Rutgers University, I almost broke down with relief. I clutched the letter and ran to the living room where my parents were watching TV. "I got in," I shouted, heart pounding. "I'm going to study financial management. Rutgers University." Dad looked up blankly. Mom offered a tight smile and muted the TV. "Rutgers?" she repeated, as if the name was a stain on the carpet. "Not Brent." I blinked hard, forcing my voice to stay steady. "I did my research. Their finance program is strong, and the tuition isn't too expensive. If you could help with the initial costs." Mom laughed. A short, cold bark. "Olivia, get real. We don't have spare money for whimsical experiments." I froze, unable to believe what I was hearing. "But you saved for Madison." Dad set his glass of water down heavily on the table. "That was different," he said evenly. "She had a clear future. She was a worthy investment." I swallowed hard. "And me?" Mom crossed her arms. "You," she said, shaking her head. "You should be practical. Manage the cafe maybe. That's a more secure future than wasting money on a useless degree. No congratulations. No hugs. No proud looks. Just a cold, solid wall standing before me." "I could work while studying," I pleaded. "I'll take out a loan. You just have to co-sign." "We don't borrow," Mom cut in sharply. "It's a family principle." I looked at them. The two people I once loved the most. Now nothing but stone statues. "You wouldn't even have to pay much," I whispered, almost begging. "Just help me get started." "No," Dad said, final and absolute. "We did enough for Madison. Now it's your turn to take responsibility for your own life." I stood there for a few more seconds, waiting for a miracle. But nothing came, except the icy silence. That night, I sat alone in my room, the soft yellow light casting a glow over the college acceptance letter lying on my bed. Tears streamed down my face, but I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall, drop by drop, like a funeral for my last illusions. By dawn, I wasn't crying anymore. I sat up straight, carefully folded the letter and tucked it into a drawer. If they didn't believe in me, I would believe in myself. If they wouldn't support me, I would find my own way. If family wasn't the place where dreams took flight, I would grow wings on my own. And I knew exactly who I needed to find. The only ones who had ever looked at me with true belief, my grandparents. I mustered every ounce of courage and walked to their small house at the end of Elm Street, my hands trembling as I knocked. When Grandma opened the door, all it took was one look and I broke down. I told them everything, holding nothing back. The pain, the humiliation, and the fragile hope I still clung to. Grandpa gripped my shoulder, his wrinkled face full of anger. "No grandchild of ours will ever give up their dreams because of selfish adults," he said, his voice shaking with fury. And when I looked into his warm eyes, for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like I mattered. I didn't know how hard the journey ahead would be. Then you knew. I wouldn't give up. Because the dream was mine, and I would fight for it. Grandma's kitchen always smelled like baked apple pies and old damp wood from decades past. I sat at the chipped wooden table, my hands clasped tightly together, overwhelmed by shame and despair. Grandpa sat across from me, deep in thought, while Grandma busied herself pouring tea, as if moving her hands would ease her heartache. I tried talking to them, I choked out. I begged, but they— "No need to say more," Grandpa interrupted, his voice low and solid as bedrock. "We understand." Grandma's gentle eyes rested on me, but her hands shook slightly, spilling a few drops of tea onto the saucer. "We won't let you give up just because your parents are blind," she said, her voice frail but firm. I shook my head, tears spilling down my cheeks. "I don't want to burden you. I just need a little support, a small amount." Grandpa leaned on the table, his eyes suddenly blazing as if he had made the most important decision of his life. "This house," he took a deep breath. "We still have the cabin in Cheshire, remember?" I nodded, my throat tightening. That cabin, the summer haven of my childhood, was a treasure trove of memories. Every scratch on the wooden floors, every faded curtain had a story. "We'll sell it," Grandpa said firmly. "The money will be enough for you to start at Rutgers." "No," I jumped up, knocking the chair over behind me. "That's your legacy. I can't let you sacrifice that." Grandpa smiled, a sad, proud smile. "Our real legacy, Olivia, isn't that cabin. It's you." I collapsed into tears, burying my face in my hands. Grandma came over and wrapped her small but sturdy arms around me, like a fortress against the whole world. The process of selling the cabin went faster than we expected. Property prices were rising, and a young couple dreaming of peaceful summers seized the opportunity. On the day of the contract signing, Grandpa wore his old suit, the same one he had worn to his daughter's wedding, and Grandma wore a faded floral dress. I came along, clutching my Rutgers enrollment papers tightly in my bag. When Grandpa signed the final paper, I noticed his hand tremble, not from hesitation, but from heartbreak. "We're buying our granddaughter a future," he said softly, as if to reassure himself. On the drive back, none of us said much, only the sound of the wind whistling through the cracked window, carrying the smell of freshly cut grass and the heavy breath of unspoken dreams. That evening, we sat in the small kitchen, eating simple sandwiches and drinking plain water. No party, no fireworks, just the sparkling pride in their eyes, and my heart, warm for the first time in a long, long while. The enrollment process was quickly completed. With the money from the cabin sale and a few small scholarships, I officially became a student in investment management at Rutgers University. The day I prepared to leave their house for school, New Hampshire's sky was heavy with thick gray clouds, as if the sky itself was mourning with us. My suitcase was ready, my old backpack slung over my shoulder. I turned for one last look at their small house. Grandpa placed his hand on my shoulder. "You may stumble, Olivia, but you'll never fall. You were born to fly." Grandma tucked a small paper bag into my hand. "Homemade cookies. No matter where you go, remember, you always have a home to come back to." I hugged them tightly, feeling the steady beat of their hearts. The hearts that had saved my life. The bus arrived. I climbed on, sitting by the window, resting my forehead against the cold glass. As the bus pulled away, I saw them standing there, waving, small but unyielding, until they disappeared into the mist. The Rutgers dorms were simple, nothing luxurious. But to me, they were heaven. I pinned a small family photo on my desk, just Grandpa, Grandma, and me, and started a new chapter. Each day, I studied harder than anyone else. Not for grades. Not to prove anything to Madison or my parents, but because I carried the sacrifices of my grandparents in every breath, every step I took. Every time exhaustion threatened to crush me, I just needed to remember the day they sold the cabin. To remind myself that quitting wasn't an option. Couldn't be. Would never be. 4 years of college passed in the blink of an eye, but every day was a battle. I graduated with my degree in investment management, not with the best GPA, but with a resilience no school could ever teach. The job market was even bleaker than I expected. I sent dozens of applications, attended countless interviews, received an avalanche of rejections. Every time I failed, I remembered the look in my grandparents' eyes the day they sent me off. And I clenched my fists tighter, pushed forward. Finally, a small trading company named Hamilton & Co., located in the city's outskirts, offered me a position. Not a prestigious firm, not a high salary, but it was my first door. The day I received the confirmation email, I jumped up in pure joy in my tiny room with peeling walls. I signed the lease for a small apartment on Willow Street. Cramped, old, but for the first time in my life, a place I could call home, through my own efforts. I paid my own utilities, bought old dishes from thrift stores, assembled a rickety wooden bookshelf myself. No one helped. No one congratulated me. But I had never felt prouder of myself. One Thursday afternoon, while struggling through a financial report at my tiny 3-desk office, my phone suddenly rang. Madison's name flashed across the screen. I stared at it for a few seconds before answering. "Olivia! It's been so long." Madison's voice was sugary sweet, but I was old enough now to hear the falseness behind every syllable. "Yeah, it has," I replied, cautious. "The family's having a gathering this weekend," she continued. "Nathan and I would love to invite you over for dinner to celebrate your new job. And by the way, I'm getting engaged." I stiffened. Engaged? No prior notice? No real conversation in years? And now, suddenly, a grand announcement? Still, a small part of me nurtured a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, the family had changed. Maybe this time, they would truly be proud of me. That Saturday night, I stood outside Madison and Nathan's neat townhouse, wearing my best white blouse and light blue jeans, the nicest things I could manage. Nathan opened the door with a half-hearted smile, letting me in. The living room was bathed in light, filled with brand-new furniture. My parents sat on the plush sofa, red wine swirling in their glasses. "Lovely, a long time no see," Mom chirped, her smile never reaching her eyes. I forced a neutral tone. "Hello everyone." Dinner started with shallow questions and hollow laughter. Then, as if she couldn't hold it back any longer, Madison dropped the first bomb. "You're working at Hamilton & Co., right?" She raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. "That company. Isn't it mostly managing assets for small shops?" I nodded. "Yes. It's a small company, but it gives me a lot of opportunities to learn." My mother let out a sharp, dry laugh. "And you needed a college degree for that, Olivia? I told you before, jobs like that, anyone willing to work hard enough could do." My father nodded leisurely, swirling his wineglass. "If you had just listened back then, you could be managing our cafe by now, instead of wasting time and money on college." I set my knife and fork down on my plate, fighting the tremble rising in my hands. "Leslie," Madison continued, her voice sweet but laced with mockery. "Nathan and I just toured a new place in Uptown, a penthouse. And you're renting somewhere, Willow Street, right? I heard that neighborhood's full of crime now." The table erupted in stifled giggles, leaking out despite their efforts. I clenched my hands under the table, feeling my blood boil, but I refused to let them see me break. I looked Madison straight in the eye and smiled. "Yeah, it's not a perfect area, but at least I pay my own rent, not waiting for Mom and Dad to buy it, or for someone else to gift it as an engagement present." The air at the table froze instantly. My mother's face turned pale. Madison's eyes widened. Nathan cleared his throat awkwardly, trying to change the subject. All right, let's not ruin the evening." I stood up, dragging my chair back loudly across the wooden floor. "I didn't come here to be insulted," I said, voice trembling but firm. "If you invited me just to remind me I'm less than, sorry, but I don't need it. I'm used to it." No one said anything. No one tried to stop me. I walked to the door, grabbing the cold doorknob. Before leaving, I turned back and gave them one last look. A gaze, stripped of any sadness, leaving only disdain. "Congratulations on the wedding, Madison," I said, a faint smile playing on my lips. "But don't forget, the ones who truly stand tall aren't those who have the most. It's those who don't need to beg anyone for anything." I opened the door and stepped out into the chilly night. The wind whipped across my face, cold, yet strangely freeing. That night, I sat on the floor of my tiny apartment, clutching a cup of hot tea, staring at the glittering stars through the old window. I knew I hadn't achieved great success yet. I knew I hadn't reached my dream heights. But at least, I was standing strong. Without them. And that was my first real victory. About 3 months after that humiliating dinner, my life took an unexpected turn. I was hunched over transaction reports in the stifling office when my phone rang. It was Lisa, the old roommate from college, the only friend who had stayed in touch. "Olivia!" Lisa practically screamed into the phone, her voice buzzing with excitement. "Remember Maxwell Investment Group? The firm we always dreamed about getting into?" I almost dropped the pen in my hand. "Maxwell, of course. But come on, that was just a fantasy." "The door's open, dummy," Lisa laughed. "They just opened a branch here in town. They're hiring junior investment analysts. I already submitted your application. Your resume is strong enough." I froze. Maxwell Investment Group. The monument of the investment world. A place where just getting hired meant you had one foot in the elite. Oh. I had always thought it was a distant dream, reserved for Ivy League graduates. Not for someone like me. Someone my family had always considered less. "I'm not sure," I whispered, my heart pounding. "Trust me," Lisa said firmly. "You're better than half the people they already hired. Don't let anyone, not even your family, make you think you're not good enough."